I'm 79 years old. My brother has been gone for 6 years now, and there are still mornings when I reach for the phone before I remember there's no one left to call on the other end. Not because I spoke to him often. We hadn't really spoken in decades. That's the part that sits in my chest. Not that he died. People die. We all know that, even if we spend most of our lives pretending we don't. What hurts is that he died while we were still strangers to each other. Brothers by blood, almost nothing else by the end. I'm not telling this to make myself look wise. At my age, the idea of looking wise feels a little pointless. I'm telling it because there isn't much time left to tell it, and because silence has a way of turning into something permanent if you let it. I live alone now. My wife passed 3 years after my brother. The house is quiet in a way that still surprises me. I've lived in this same place for over 40 years, and yet it sometimes feels like a hotel room I checked into and never quite unpacked. The walls hold a lot of memories, but most of them belong to people who aren't here anymore. In the evenings, when the light starts to fade and the street outside goes quiet, I find myself thinking about things I once assumed I could always fix later. Conversations I believed could be had when work slowed down. Apologies I thought could wait until emotions cooled. Time I treated like something that would keep renewing itself, like a subscription you forget you're even paying for. My brother was 2 years older than me. We grew up in a small house with thin walls and a father who worked too much and a mother who worried too quietly. We shared a room until I was 10. 2 beds, a narrow space between them, and a single window that rattled in the winter. As boys, we were close in the way children are close when they don't yet know how to be separate. We fought, of course, over toys, over space, over nothing at all. But we also built things together, tree forts that never quite held, model airplanes that lost their wings, long summer afternoons where time felt endless and the future was something other people worried about. He was the serious one, I was the talker. He liked things in order, I liked noise. Our parents used to joke that we balanced each other out. At the time it felt true. In our teens, that balance started to shift. He became quieter, more inward. I became more restless, more eager to get out of the house, out of the town, out of anything that felt like it might keep me in one place too long. We still got along, but something had changed. We were no longer moving in the same direction, even if we were still under the same roof. When I left for college, I remember him standing in the driveway, hands in his pockets, watching me load my suitcase into the car. He didn't say much. He never did. He just nodded and told me to drive safe. I told him I'd call. I meant it. At first I did, not often but enough, a few minutes here and there, updates about classes, about friends, about plans that seemed important at the time. He would listen, ask a question or two, then go quiet again. I mistook that quiet for indifference. I didn't realize it was simply the way he was. After college came work, then more work. Then the slow, steady building of a life that looked responsible from the outside. A job with long hours, a marriage, children, a mortgage. All the things that are supposed to mean you're doing it right. My brother stayed closer to home. He worked in the same town most of his life. Married later than I did. No children. A small circle of friends. A routine that rarely changed. We saw each other at holidays, birthdays, the occasional family gathering. We'd shake hands, sometimes hug. We'd talk about safe things, the weather, our parents' health, work, nothing that required too much honesty. There was a distance between us, but it didn't feel dangerous. It felt temporary, like a gap that could be crossed whenever we decided to take a step, and so we didn't. It wasn't that we were angry with each other. There was no single argument that split us apart, no dramatic falling out, just a series of small misunderstandings, unspoken disappointments, and assumptions that the other person already knew what we felt. I assumed he knew I cared. He assumed I was too busy to bother. I assumed there would be time. He probably did too. The years moved the way years always do, slowly until they don't. My children grew up. My parents grew old. My brother and I exchanged fewer calls then, almost none at all. Not out of hostility, out of habit. Silence, I learned too late, is a habit that deepens with use. There were moments when I thought about reaching out, a Sunday afternoon when the house was quiet, a long drive home from work, a birthday I almost forgot. Each time I told myself I'd call later, when things were calmer, when I had more to say, when I could give the conversation the attention it deserved. Later became next week became next month became next year. When our father died, we stood together at the funeral, two middle-aged men in dark suits watching the last of our childhood lowered into the ground. We spoke then, of course, about arrangements, about our mother, about practical things. There was a moment after most people had left when we were alone by the grave. He looked tired, smaller than I remembered. For a second, I thought about saying something real, something that went beyond logistics and surface-level comfort. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. That was a pattern in my life, waiting for the right words and letting the moment pass while I searched for them. After that, our mother's health declined. There were hospital visits, phone calls, decisions that had to be made. My brother handled most of it, living closer, being the one who could drop everything and drive over. I told myself he was better at that sort of thing, more patient, more steady. What I didn't tell myself was that I was using his steadiness as an excuse to stay distant. When our mother died, we spoke again, briefly, with the kind of politeness you offer a coworker you've known a long time but never really known well. We divided responsibilities, we divided belongings, we divided the past into manageable pieces. We did not divide our grief. We each carried it alone. After the funeral, we stood in the driveway of the house we'd grown up in, now empty, the windows dark, the yard overgrown, a place that had once been full of noise and argument and small, ordinary moments that only seem important when they're gone. He said, "We should keep in touch more." I said, "We should." Neither of us followed through. The distance between us didn't feel like a wound. It felt like a scar that had formed so gradually we barely noticed it. It didn't hurt most of the time, but it was there, marking where something had once been connected and now wasn't. Years passed. My children moved away. My career slowed. Retirement came, not with the relief I'd imagined, but with a strange sense of being unmoored. The structure that had once filled my days was gone, and in its place was time, more time than I knew what to do with. That was when the silence started to feel louder. I thought about my brother more then, about how long it had been since we'd really talked, about how little I knew about his life now. The thought of calling him crossed my mind often, and just as often I put it off. I told myself it would be awkward, that we'd have nothing to say, that too much time had passed. What I didn't admit was that I was afraid of what I might hear, afraid of what he might say, afraid that the distance between us had become something I couldn't explain away anymore. Then one morning, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, a hospital, a nurse. She asked if I was his brother. She said he'd had a stroke. that it was serious, that I should come. The drive felt longer than it was. The roads were familiar, but my thoughts weren't. They kept circling the same question. What would I say when I saw him? When I reached the hospital, he was already unconscious. Tubes, machines, a room that smelled of disinfectant and quiet urgency. He looked smaller than I remembered, older, vulnerable in a way I had never seen him before. I sat by his bed and talked, not because I thought he could hear me, because I didn't know what else to do. I told him about my life, about the kids, about the grandkids he'd never met, about things I should have told him years ago. Ordinary things, important things, apologies that felt thin and late in the air of that room. He never woke up. He died 2 days later. There was no final conversation, no moment of understanding, no chance to ask the questions that had waited too long to be asked or to give the answers that had never been offered. At the funeral, people spoke about him, his kindness, his reliability, the way he showed up for others without making a fuss. I listened, and I realized how little of his adult life I had actually been a part of. I was his brother in name, in memory, in shared childhood, but not in the day-to-day story of who he had become. That realization settled into me slowly, and then all at once. Regret doesn't arrive like a thunderclap. It seeps in. It finds the quiet moments. It shows up when you're washing dishes or sitting in traffic or lying awake in the dark. It asks small, persistent questions. Why didn't you call? Why did you wait? What did you think you were saving time for? I had no good answers. What I had were 1,000 small justifications that no longer mattered. Work, distance, discomfort. The belief that relationships could be paused and resumed like a movie. They can't. Some things, once left unattended, don't wait for you to be ready. In the years since his death, I've gone back through old photographs, 2 boys in a backyard, teenagers at a kitchen table, young men at a wedding. The images are proof that we once shared a life, even if we didn't share enough of it when it counted. I sometimes try to imagine what our relationship could have been like if I had been braver with my time, if I had picked up the phone when it felt inconvenient, if I had accepted a little awkwardness in exchange for a little more closeness. It's a quiet kind of sorrow, not dramatic, not loud, just a steady awareness of what might have been. People talk about regret as if it's always tied to big mistakes, the wrong career, the wrong marriage, the wrong decision. But some of the deepest regret comes from things that seemed harmless, from delay, from assuming there would always be another chance. I didn't lose my brother because of a fight. I lost him because of silence. And silence, once it stretches long enough, starts to feel normal. It starts to feel like the way things are rather than a choice you're making every day. Now at 79, I feel time differently, not as something that will run out someday, but as something that is running out. The difference is subtle, but it changes everything. When I think of him, I don't think about the years we didn't speak as much as I think about the ease with which I let those years slip by. How quickly later replaced now, how naturally someday stood in for today. If you're listening to this and you're younger than I am, I won't tell you what to do. I don't have the authority, and I don't have the certainty. All I have is the shape of a life that learned something too late. I learned that relationships don't usually end with slammed doors. They fade, they thin, they grow quiet, and by the time you notice how quiet they've become, it can already be too late to bring the sound back. I learned that love, when it isn't expressed, doesn't disappear, but it also doesn't protect you from loss. It just turns into something unspoken, something you carry alone. I learned that waiting for the perfect moment often means missing the only moment you'll get. These aren't lessons I read in a book or heard in a speech. They're things I came to understand sitting beside a hospital bed, talking to someone who could no longer answer. Now, when I think of my brother, I don't imagine the man he was at the end as much as the boy he was at the beginning. The one who shared a room with me, the one who watched me drive away and told me to be careful, the one I always assumed would be there. He was there, until he wasn't. Time doesn't announce when it's about to close a door. It just does. I have grandchildren now. They're loud, impatient, full of plans. They live in a world that moves faster than mine ever did. I watch them, and I recognize the same certainty I once had, the same belief that there will always be time to fix things, to say things, to reconnect. Maybe there will be, maybe there won't. I don't say much when they talk about their lives. I listen. Listening is something I've learned to do better, even if I learned it late. Sometimes when the house is full and the noise is almost too much, I think about how silence once felt easier, how I chose it without realizing the cost. I don't know how many years I have left. None of us do, really. But at my age, the question feels less abstract. I wake up each day aware that it is, in some small way, a limited thing, a resource that doesn't renew. If this story means anything, I hope it's this, that the people we love are not part of the background of our lives. They are the life, and when we let them drift into the background, we don't always get to bring them back into focus. I can't speak to my brother anymore. I can't tell him what I should have told him when he was alive. I can't ask the questions that waited too long. I carry that knowledge quietly. It doesn't need to be loud to be heavy. Sometimes in the evening, when the house is especially still, I sit in the chair by the window and look out at the street. Cars pass, lights change, people go about their lives, assuming, as I once did, that the next day is a given. I think about how much of my life was spent preparing for a future that in the end was shorter than I imagined. How many conversations I postponed because they felt uncomfortable or inconvenient. How many connections I trusted time to take care of for me. Time doesn't take care of anything. It only takes. If you feel the distance growing between you and someone you once cared about, you don't need a perfect speech or a dramatic gesture. Sometimes all that's required is the willingness to break the silence before it becomes unbreakable. I wish I had understood that earlier. I wish I had been less patient with postponement and more patient with awkward beginnings. I wish I had treated ordinary moments as the fragile things they are. These wishes don't change the past. They just shape the way I live with it. I'm 79 years old. I've lived long enough to see how quietly things can slip away and how loudly they can echo once they're gone. My brother's absence is part of the room now, even when no one speaks of it. This is what regret really feels like. Not sharp, not sudden, just a steady presence, a reminder that some silences once chosen cannot be undone.